Milton Kokel. Milton, and got it. Yeah.
Got it.
Pauline Kokel, and it was, she always baked cookies.
Yes.
And whenever you came over, she would always have fresh cookies. And then they would, you could, and I didn't like coffee, but we would take a cookie and dip it in coffee and eat it. And I thought that was a treat.
Right.
And even though I never have liked coffee when I was a little kid, I remember dipping my cookies in the coffee.
Right. I think that
And,
must be a
Yeah,
Kokel thing.
Yeah, it
I know I
must
learned
be.
to do that too. Yeah.
And then, and I remember going to, your mom and dad as a little kid, and we always, we have to be polite and all that. And same thing when we went to Rosalie During and Carl During's house when we were little kids. I remember when we would go visit there, it was always a big event to, go up the steps and go
Oh
into
yes. Oh yes.
That was,
They had that big house, and they moved that house, didn't they? Somewhere farther west, off of Austin Avenue. I guess I think there's a park there now. Yeah.
And
But I know I always thought too that was such a special place. But
and then I remember going, and we always, of course, when my grandma lived right across Norbert and Alvina, so it was always a big, treat to go to Norbert and Alvina. And sometimes when we got out of church, then we'd go over there. So some traditions never really change, because we would get out of church and then we'd go over to Norbert and Alvina, and Dad and Norbert and the people that were over there would all drink a beer and talk. And now everybody goes to Fred Blakey and does that.
Oh really?
So
Okay.
yeah, so.
Does Fred live around here?
Yeah, Fred lives where Ray Micken garage is. If you drop down the creek and you just cross over, there's a
Is it that
house there.
big white house?
No, it's a 1-story house that sits back
Okay.
off. It's
okay.
not the big one. It's one
Yeah.
up the creek from there.
Okay.
And that was Candy's parents were Murchings,
Okay.
and that was the Murching. They had like maybe 15, 20 acres there,
Okay.
and they bought that, and then they moved a house there many years ago, and then they lived in St. Louis, and they moved there. But and then I remember going to we used to take we harvested cotton, and we would take cotton to Wahlberg or Theon.
Okay.
Theon was closer, but usually when you start harvesting cotton, the gins were busy.
Yes.
So,
yes.
and we only had like 2 trailers, and then people picked cotton, and so you needed to figure out how you could get your trailer empty, so you could pick cotton,
Right.
the next day or so.
Right.
And so I remember when we would haul cotton over there, and then I remember as a little kid, well, we got to, they couldn't call, they didn't have phones, so they'd have to go over and figure out as soon as the trailer got empty, then they would go, get it so they could pick some more cotton.
Right.
And then they had cotton pickers that we'd go to Andice and pick up some cotton pickers, or go to Georgetown and pick up cotton pickers, and I was probably somewhere between 4 and 8 when that went on.
Right. You were not quite big enough.
Yeah,
Pick cotton.
well, I mean, I picked cotton, but we didn't.
Yeah.
When my dad farmed at one time, he might have like 60, 70 acres of cotton. One time he farmed about 300 acres in the early 60s till about 50s till about 56. Of course, 55, 56 were the drought years, and
Oh,
then
yes.
57, 58, 59 were pretty good years, and that would have been that, and probably before, but the early 50s I would have been 2 or 3, and I remember a little bit about that. But my grandma Kokel would come over, and then Ruth and Arthur Swoush, they would sometimes come over, and then Loretta and Elaine was 1 year older than I was, and Loretta was 2 years older. And my grandma Pauline would take care of us, and we had a sand pile under a hackberry tree, and then we had a shed next to it, and one was a wash house, the next one was a smokehouse, and the next one was a blacksmith. And right next to the wash house was a sand pile. And I don't know what I did one day, but I remember I didn't do something that Grandma didn't like, and she broke off a hackberry stick and gave me a spanking.
Uh-oh.
And I remember my
You
spanking.
remember
I don't know
that.
what I did wrong, but I
You
remember
remember the
my spanking.
spanking.
Yeah.
Well, they
Yeah.
used to say, spare the rod and spoil the child, so.
Yeah, yeah. So, and she was a small woman, but she knew how to swing a hackberry stick, I guess.
Well, my mama, I
and that's
remember.
how she wouldn't. I don't remember. It's about the only thing, that I don't remember ever being cross or anything. But I guess that made an impression on me when she.
Yeah. Yeah, she didn't have a mean.
No, she didn't have a
Bone in her
mean bone in her body. I don't think.
Well, at one time we lived right next door to Aunt Pauline, there in the gin house, and yeah,
Okay, so y'all lived in that gin house next to her.
yeah.
What year did y'all move out of that?
We moved. I must have been. I'm thinking maybe.
I'm 60. I'm going to be 68 in March, and I guess he's probably
He's going to be 78. In
78 in March. Yeah, yeah.
We're that much older than you. Yeah.
And you're the same year he
Same,
is. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you know Coach Denham? Milton
Yes, I
Denham?
did. I did. I saw his obituary. Sure
He was
did.
my football coach.
Was he?
I remember, and then my dad barbered with his dad.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't know that.
And then, he was, we were pretty close friends because his dad and my dad had worked together for 20, 30 years.
Why, sure.
And he was he was a young coach, and of course, football coaches kind of make an impression on you, when you're in high school.
Oh, yeah. Well, Joe still misses your dad.
It's Pauline Kokel, and she was married to John. Is that right, John? Yeah, and he died. I mean, I never met him because he died when my dad was 3 or 4, maybe 6 years old. So, and he had a bad kidney, and then I think a mule may have kicked him, and the other kidney got infected, and he died. So then, Marina and Lillian and Ruth, and my dad and Norman was his youngest brother. They pretty much, they grew up with taking care of the farm with my grandma,
Okay.
and so they pretty much farmed. And my dad was being the oldest boy. I mean, he pretty much farmed. He never. Now Norman went off to school and got to teaching. But the rest of the kids pretty much, when they got out of school, they either, Marina and Lillian went to work in Austin, and eventually they worked at Scottish Rite Dormitory,
Yeah, I
and
remember that.
and that's what Marina was like head cook, and Lillian was her assistant, and then eventually, years later, Marina married late, but Mac McEachin, who she married, he had owned airport florist, and his wife died, and he was a Masonic lodge, and the hall, I'm trying to think of what
The Masons?
the Mason, yeah, the hall that they ran was a Masonic lodge hall.
Okay.
It had a name. God, I can't believe I can't think of the name. It was the dorm in Austin at the University of Texas that the Masonic lodge girls went to.
Yeah.
So they pretty much every Sunday they had flowers on the table when the families came. They kept it decorated. And they had a greenhouse in back of the dorm, Scottish Rite dorm, I guess is what it was called.
Right.
And they had a greenhouse in back of it, and Mac raised flowers and was the groundskeeper and took care of the grounds and had 3 or 4 employees. And so that was kind of how they met. And then even after they married, he kind of took care of the grounds, and she was a main cook for a number of years. And so, so we'd go to that dorm and as little kids, and I remember, we had to be really, sit down and have real manners, and they actually put down plates with napkins and silverware and
Right.
cups and that at least every weekend. I don't know what they did during the week, but
I'll bet, knowing
was-
Marina, I'll bet she had that done every day.
yeah, I think they did that pretty much
Yeah.
every day, at least, for any major event. And then Mac would see that like no matter when Easter was, he could make sure Easter lilies would be blooming for Easter, so that they could put Easter lilies on the place settings and on the tables, and then all through the year
My goodness.
he did flowers. He was a really talented person. And then he actually, when they came to Paulina's house, he liked to help her garden. And so there toward the later years, they would come out and she'd always have a beautiful garden. And then Gus and his wife, Richter, they liked to garden that land in between them. It was actually my grandma's land, but she couldn't garden that much. She had a big enough patch in the back.
Right.
And so Gus liked to garden. And I always enjoyed going out there because to this day I still like to garden.
Mm-hmm.
In my mother's house, we have a little area that I still, I've noticed there's a bunch of asparagus I need to cut before I leave tomorrow, so take me a few bunches of asparagus back.
Right.
So I still in the garden, and I think I picked that up from my grandma. My grandma Keishnik, my grandma Kokel, always had really nice fruit trees and had good peaches, and so memories of picking peaches and canned peaches and were always a good thing. And then we had quite a few pecan trees in our the farm, the Kokel farm. So whenever the pecans made good years, we picked pecans, and even like before my mother got Alzheimer's and went to assisted living, the last 3 or 4 years we had some pretty good pecan crops, and she would spend a lot of her time, for 10, 12 hours a day just peeling pecans, which I felt was a really good therapy for somebody
Sure.
that's sitting there, can't do too much, and
Exactly.
people would come visit and
Sure.
peel pecans, and then of course all the kids and neighbors and everybody got benefits of pecans because when people would come, she'd give them pecans.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I always thought all the Kokel family was, there wasn't many mean bones in any of the Kokel descendants. They were pretty relaxed and didn't get upset. My dad never really, got upset about too much anything. I mean, except of course he'd get upset with us for not doing what we were told, which
There
we
you
didn't
go.
do most of the time.
There you go.
And but he made us living eventually barbering, but we always had we actually had a place called the Klepotch place that they had bought, and I think they bought that after my granddad died, and so they had that was 200 acres, and the other one was 100 acres, so they had about 300 acres. My dad farmed there for a while, which back in the old days,
That was
300
quite a
acres
bit.
was a lot. Nowadays, 300 acres, if you're not farming 3,000 acres, you're not going to make it. But back in those days, that was all an individual could do. And then I think the 50s ran a lot of farmers out of business because it was so dry, nobody made any crops.
Oh, it was,
And that
what,
was when-
7 years or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that?
a number of years
Yeah.
that they didn't. And so eventually, we raised cattle, but farming never really, it was a way of life and a means to make a living, but most people that got prosperous was making a living from something other than farming.
Sure, sure.
And the few people that I do know, even in the 60s, and some of the people I went to high school with that were farmers and ranchers eventually went out of business.
Right, yeah,
Too many bad years,
that's true.
too much expenses, and it's just not a profitable thing to do unless now if you play all the government games and farm a lot of land, then you can make it, but you got to be big, and
You
so
do, and the weather has to be good
weather
too.
has to be good, and
It
it's
has
tough,
to be.
and the government controls
Oh, yeah,
a lot more
That's
now
true.
than they did then if you don't have all the insurance and programs. And so most of the people that we grew up with that farmed and ranched, and the gins and stuff like that. It's pretty much was a way of life that died out in the 70s, I would say, late 60s, 70s.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but,
So what did you do with yourself most of the?
oh, well, I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do for a living. No, I ended up going to work. I had various jobs off and on, but I went to Southwest Texas, and then I eventually went to work for the city of Austin, and I surveyed for 14 years, and then I went into construction inspection and inspected roads and water and sewer lines and stuff like that for about 15 years. And I retired from the city of Austin in 2000. And then from 2000 to now, I've worked for a couple private companies and now the city of Leander for 10 and a half years, and continued to do the same thing I did when I was construction inspection. Inspect roads, water lines, sewer lines. We build elevated storage tanks and sewer plants and stuff like that. And it's been I working for the city of Austin was frustrating, but yet it was. I have 4 siblings. My oldest girl is Julie, and she married a guy named Brian Range, and she got a degree in chemical engineering from A&M. He got a degree from chemical engineering at A&M. And then he went on to Harvard Law School, and he became a lawyer, intellectual property lawyer. And then my daughter worked for an engineering firm for 8 or 10 years. They had 2 little boys, and then she worked part-time. And then now my son-in-law just quit being a patent attorney and became a patent judge, federal patent judge, and he works out of his house. And so he gets to spend more time with his kids and stuff.
That's good.
And then my oldest son got a degree in electrical engineering, and he went to school in Japan for a while, had some back problems, had a couple back operations. He works with like radar in Austin for a company, and the company he works for is not all that successful, so he probably ought to be switching jobs, but he really likes what he's doing. He's sticking with that. And then my next son is worked for Schlumberger, and he got a mechanical engineering from A&M, and then he went on and got his master's at UT after he worked for Schlumberger a few years. And he said he wasn't going to work for Schlumberger and be working in Houston the rest of his life. So he went back to UT, got a degree, and applied for jobs. And the best job he could find was with Schlumberger in Houston. So he went back. But actually, when he did that, they switched his title, switched his stuff. And then during that time, he met his wife. And she was going to the University of Houston. She's an optometrist. And so they both worked in Houston and seemed pretty happy in Houston. And then my youngest daughter went to UT, and she went to Concordia High School, and we got her on the Texas Tomorrow program. So then when she was in high school, she went to ACC and Concordia College, and so when she got out, she had like 34 hours. And then she went to Argentina for a while and got a few hours there. So when she graduated from UT, got a degree in Spanish, she wanted to go back and work for South America, like with nonprofits and stuff, and she found out the only job she could get was teaching. So then she went back and ended up getting a teaching certificate through the deal where you go teach at a school and people observe you, and then you can get it quicker. Mm-hmm. And she did that, and then she went and taught in Coruscant for 1 year, which is an island down by Venezuela, and then came back, and she's at A&M getting her master's in Spanish, something. She's got her education hours. She's got a boyfriend from Brazil that's getting his doctorate in petroleum engineering, and so they're talking about getting married here, but they haven't set a date. And so that's what my kids are. And then my oldest daughter, my son in Houston, has a baby girl and has one on the way that he just told us about the last few weeks. So
Okay.
most people don't even know that. And my oldest daughter, and they have two boys, 11 and about 9, and then they adopted a little girl that's 3 years old. And she's 3, and they took her about over a year to adopt her with the circumstances and stuff. But so so my wife, my wife quit teaching school when the two little boys were like 3 and 4, or 2 and 4, so she could help raise the little boys, and my daughter was still working part-time. That's, the one thing that was probably centered, especially because my mother, was a Keeshnik, and her dad was the principal and taught at the school all those years and everything. And then my dad, I was born and raised, both my parents came from here, and we all went to Zion Lutheran.
That was the hub of the
and that was the hub of the community and everybody, so, you were pretty close, and still, like all my relatives from Wahlberg, I still hunt and fish, and we do a lot of things together. Sammy and Gary Curio, and even my classmates, that most of them are, not in the Wahlberg area, but we still stay in contact. And Sylvia and I had, because my wife was a Lutheran teacher, and we spend a lot of time with my mom and dad. And then after my dad died, and when I went to work for the city of Leander 10 years ago, it was real convenient for me to go to her 2 nights a week as opposed to go home. And I don't want to sound like I was a really nice guy helping my mother. I think I did a little bit. The other side of the coin, when I went home, I could go to Dale's and the Wahlberg Mercantile and have a few drinks and go home, eat breakfast with her, and go back and get some space between me and my wife, which is.
Well, and your
it was
mom,
fun.
I know she appreciated
Yeah, and it was
that.
fun, and I mean,
Yeah.
and I enjoyed, and it was she, and and they got to play on the farm, and I wish she could have stayed in the farmhouse longer, but and she stayed in assisted living for 3 or 4 years, and she was starting, she fell, and her cornea fell out of her eye. She had a cornea transplant like 15, 20 years earlier. And when she fell, she really didn't hurt herself, other than apparently when you get stitched up, your eye never heals. And it just fell out, so she lost the sight of that eye. And that was kind of the beginning of, she'd had some other episodes, of burning cookies and forgetting things, but I guess we all do a little of that, But so then that was kind of uh, but now, we went and saw her today in Chester. Chester's here, and he's pretty religious, and start talking to her and sang a couple songs with her. She had really was a good half hour, 45 minutes we spent with her. So I just told my wife, who wasn't with us today, we're going to go to church in the morning and go straight over there and spend another 30, 45 minutes, and just because it went so well this morning that I thought, wow, the opportunity's here. And I think if you go see her in the morning, she's fresher than,
Right.
because sometimes when in the afternoon she's confused. And talking was my grandma,
Right.
and Pauline was a Tynard, and I really never knew her husband because he died before. He died when my dad was young, so most of the Kokel family I knew were I guess mostly the girls. I mean, and but there's still a lot of the Kokel family and the Tynard family that some of them that live in Houston, and I took my mother to Alice Tynard, was a lady that went to Warburg till she was like 3rd or 4th grade, and I took my mother to that funeral a couple years ago, and she always enjoyed visiting with Alice, and that was one of the last things I did, and took her to the Keeshnik reunion, and she enjoyed that, and she still, the good thing, she still recognizes the family, She
That's good.
recognizes me, brothers and sisters, and you know, if you talk to her, and the thing about it, I guess if we like, and I used to take her to when she was in assisted living. My wife and I took her to my daughters a lot, and they live in great